Hello, I'm Jamie Kale Miller of Pandora Astrology. I'm a practicing astrologer in the San Francisco Bay Area and have been for more than 32 years. Today, I'm going to tell you about Mercury, how to think about it, how to interpret it in your own chart, and how to learn about yourself and other people and communicate with them better by understanding Mercury. So Mercury is, of course, mythologically the messenger god, the god with wings on his feet and wings on his cap and wings on his staff, which is called the caduceus. And there are some interesting factors mythologically about Mercury that can help you to understand him astrologically. One of these is that Mercury was a god who had no realm of his own. He was able to travel up to Mount Olympus and hang out with the other gods. You might think of that as the realm of fire, the realm of inspiration, and the divine, if you will. Mercury could also travel to the underworld and visit with Hades and Persephone, Pluto and Proserpina, and even was an escort for human beings who were mortal to be able to come and go from the underworld. So he could go to the realms of water as well. Now, Mercury could also put on a disguise and sort of, shall we say, turn down the volume on his divine aura so that he would be tolerable to humans. Because, it's kind of a factor in the Greco-Roman mythology that if you see a god or goddess in their full glory, it kind of strikes you blind and stuff like that. So he could turn that volume down and hang out on Earth with the mortals too. So he could travel in all three of those realms, but he didn't have one of his own. So I would say that his realm is air, which is, the element that connects with all of the others, and where he spent a lot of his time flying around and delivering messages and delivering people and making mischief, lots and lots of mischief. So another factor that I want to tell you mythologically about Mercury is that in his role as Psychopompos, he could escort humans and other deities to the underworld, which is otherwise the realm of Pluto and Persephone. And this really has a symbology in our understanding of the astrological Mercury, which is that Mercury represents our forebrain, our consciousness, our mind, our intelligence, which we tend to identify with. And the fact that Mercury could, as Psychopompos, travel to the underworld signifies how we can use our mind, our conscious intelligence, to delve into the hidden and more mysterious parts of our brain and parts of our nature. We can use hypnosis to explore our subconscious. We can use lucid dreaming to explore our dream life. So our minds can really travel anywhere. So let me tell you what are the areas that you can learn about with Mercury in your chart. First of all, you can learn about how do you think? What is your thinking style? What is your style of processing information? Mercury's sign will tell you an awful lot about that. Mercury's house will tell you some things about that as well, more about the contents and the preoccupations of your thoughts. Like Mercury in the 11th house means that you like to talk with your friends a lot. You like to share ideas in groups. You like to brainstorm and bounce ideas off of other people. Mercury really likes to be in the 11th house. So thinking is a very big part of what Mercury brings us in our charts. Communication is another thing that Mercury brings us. Obviously, that's a natural outcropping of thinking, because when you have an idea, of course, you want to share it with another human being. So communication, however, has a dualistic nature, which is another Mercury factor. A couple of ways that plays out. One is that Mercury actually rules two signs. It rules Gemini and it rules Virgo. Now, this is part of traditional astrology when we only knew about 7 bodies in the sky that ruled things. And so some of them had to do double duty and rule 2 things, 2 signs. And some of those have since given up one sign to a planet that's been discovered in the modern era. For example, Saturn used to rule both Capricorn and Aquarius, and now Aquarius is seen by modern astrologers as governed by the planet Uranus, which has really illuminated some of the meanings of Aquarius and its attendant house, which is the 11th house. So Mercury, however, has never given up one of its two signs. Mercury has retained a strong rulership of both, and these signs are different from each other, but one thing that they have in common is their mutability. Mutable is one of the three qualities or modes: cardinal, fixed, and mutable. Mutable is all about flexibility, fluidity, changeability, and really has a strong factor of duality. In fact, the mutable signs are largely called the dual signs. Sagittarius, part, human or god from the waist up, horse from the waist down. Gemini, obviously, the twins. Pisces, the two fish. Even Virgo has a dual nature, and these are all the mutable signs. When I think of Virgo's dual nature, what I think of most is the odd couple, Felix and Oscar, which you'll remember from the old TV show. And, in the TV show, you would see that Felix was always, vacuuming during poker games. And Oscar was like, throwing his pizza crusts underneath the bed. So Oscar was super messy, but more like relaxed and genial and warm-hearted. And Felix was, kind of, stuck up, you might say, although not like superior, but just so fastidious. But these guys, they were roommates. They were both divorced, and they were roommates in an era in which, grown men didn't usually be roommates anymore. So I think that Virgo has a dual nature because Virgo's sensitivity is to order. Virgo wants to create order, and Virgo loves order. And where Virgo fails to create order, they sometimes just kind of give up and throw the pizza crust under the bed because they can't stand it. So there is a dualistic nature to Virgo as well. Gemini, it's obvious, that's the twins, right? So so Mercury as a deity has a very dualistic nature. And this brings me back to the idea of communication, because communication is not just about speaking, although it is about speaking, but it's also about listening. And this is actually something you'd think that maybe Geminis would be good at, but it's something that they have to learn. They have to learn, how do I articulate my thoughts and my ideas and lob them over into the other guy's court so that they get what I'm saying, so that the communication fully lands in their court, which requires an awareness of their court as opposed to just your own. This is all a tennis metaphor, but I think you get what I'm saying. So, so it's about lobbing the idea all the way over the net into the other court, but also receiving the other person's serve. You know, when she lobs it over into your court, do you find it? Do you hit it back? Can you create a volley with another person? Is there a good conversational spacing? Is it really a back and forth conversation, or is one person just talking and the other person's just listening? So this is kind of a life lesson for Gemini: is how do I participate in and develop in myself good conversation and conversational skills? So this is the communicating part of Mercury. So we've talked about how you think and how that's reflected in your Mercury, how you communicate, how that's reflected in your Mercury. And I'll give examples of these in a minute, but I just want to go through all five first. So Mercury tells us about, how do you learn? What is your style of learning? How do you take in information? How do you process it? How do you hold on to it and retain it? How do you apply it to the rest of what you know? And I like to think of Mercury, but Gemini kind of in particular, as a roundhouse for ideas to come and go. And this relates back to the mutable nature of Gemini, which is to say, it's kind of like, by a roundhouse, I mean similar to a train, where a train pulls in, gets worked on, and then the house actually spins the train so that it can then drive out again. So a roundhouse for ideas is kind of like ideas come in, Gemini in particular, Virgo too, but I think Gemini a little bit more so, just loves research, loves to discover new ideas, goes out into the world seeking new ideas, wants to absorb information. So your mind goes out, gathers information, brings it into the roundhouse, which actually I imagine a little bit more like an airplane hangar, with ideas being represented by ping pong balls bouncing everywhere around the airplane hangar and bouncing off of each other occasionally, and maybe through combustion birthing new ideas. So ideas are brought in and then they bounce around the space and they bounce off of each other. And then when they're organized into, something coherent, they are then, sent back out into the world. I think that Geminis really love to be consulted about ideas or given something to research or, to know that their information is useful, right? It's useful data. So yeah, Mercury is very much about learning. It's also about your work environment. And so Mercury in your chart can tell you about what is the best work environment for you. This is more connected to Mercury's rulership of Virgo. Virgo and its house, which is the sixth house, is all about how can you be efficient and effective? What are the systems, the rhythms, the routines that you can use to create useful workflows and to be productive? How do you run your task lists? How do you organize your projects? How do you run your calendar? How do you keep your contact lists? How do you put it all together? And then what are the systems where you run all that stuff so that you can get stuff done? That's all very sixth house. It's kind of third house in Gemini too, but it's really more Mercury in its rulership of Virgo and the sixth house. And that's because Virgo is an earth sign, whereas Gemini is an air sign. So the earth sign side of Mercury is very practical, is the artisan, the shaper, the maker, the molder of fine objects, the creator of that which is useful, the tool user, which makes a lot of sense because some of what makes us human is that we have these articulated thumbs, we have these opposable thumbs that enable us to be tool using creatures. And Virgo is absolutely that. So Mercury in your chart can tell you about what is the right work environment for you, how to set that up, and how to create the workflows that will help you to do the mental processing that goes with the work. Now, the last thing that I want to mention is that Mercury in your chart can tell you about your voice. What is your own authentic voice? Remember, I mentioned that Mercury is the messenger god. So Mercury is the carrier of messages. And if Mercury is really strong in your chart, maybe you identify with Mercury because maybe Mercury is connected to your ascendant or your sun or your moon, or maybe you're just, you've got a strong Gemini contingent in your chart or a strong Virgo contingent in your chart, then you might feel like you're here to bring a message and that you've got to discover your voice. Now, that can be in terms of writing or it can be in terms of speaking. And so, discovering your voice and how to express your voice, how to unleash your voice, how to use your voice, and the contents of the message that your voice is here to bring, all of these things can be found in your Mercury sign. So I'm going to take a moment now to talk about Mercury through the elements and just say a little bit about each of these 5 factors in the 4 elements. So Mercury let's just start with air because that's the easiest. Mercury is really comfortable in all of the air signs. Air, of course, is very cerebral and very cool, and Mercury is an air planet to begin with. So it's pretty comfortable in all of the air signs where it gets to express its cerebral, intellectual, dry, cool nature pretty clearly and pretty strongly. So the thinking process for Mercury in the air signs does tend to be pretty logical, pretty rational. And in Libra especially, Mercury likes to think along good design principles. And then the contents of what you think about can also be tied to the element as well. So you would be thinking about your social connections. You'd be thinking about how am I as a communicator? You would be thinking about, what ideas can I discover next and how can I communicate them to people? So Mercury really likes being in air. So your style of communication will be also very air. It will be, let us sit down and have a conversation, which is rational, and let's not veer off into too much emotion. And also, let's keep it abstract and hypothetical. Let's just talk about what's possible, not what's actual, because that would be Earth, and we'll get to Earth shortly. And let's not indulge in too much hyperbole. Let's stick to facts. So that would be the style of communicating with Mercury and air. And then learning too. I think that Mercury and air people really enjoy learning in the abstract and the hypothetical, and they can hold ideas without having to have a practical physical proof of the idea. And they love a pure idea. I remember an Aquarius friend of mine years ago saying that for him, an idea, like a pure idea, had a beauty, like it had its own crystalline structure. He always imagined it as having like this pure, clean, crystalline structure. And he just had a great deal of fondness for that, which is so Aquarian, right? So let's talk about work environment when you have Mercury in air. You want to really optimize ways to help yourself think and communicate as quickly as possible and research as effectively as possible. So you would probably really need to have, good internet and fast, fast communication lines, because the practical stuff doesn't matter so much when you have Mercury in air. What really matters is, how quickly can you learn and communicate your ideas. So the work environment is not so much about things like physical tools. It's more about how can you get the tools that will optimize your use of your brain. And now when it comes to voice, your natural voice, if you have Mercury in air, is going to be airy. It's going to be dry, cool, hypothetical, and you might have to listen to other people when they tell you that you're too dry, you're too cool, and you come off as distant or like a know-it-all. You might need to hear that and do something about that to make your voice a little bit warmer, so that people are going to want to hear the message that you're here to bring. So if you have Mercury in Earth, that's another place where Mercury can be somewhat comfortable, especially in Virgo for obvious reasons, because it rules Virgo. But also, Mercury really appreciates the concrete when in Virgo, when in Earth in general. So that includes Taurus and Capricorn. So the thinking is very concrete and the learning is very concrete. People with Mercury in Earth will learn best with their bodies, learn best if they can physically interact with what they're learning. So they don't necessarily do so well with like the abstract maths and ideas like that, but they can be exceptional when it comes to like literal machinery or physical puzzles, or they learn and memorize by touch, like knowing how to dial a phone number because of the way that your finger moves on the keypad, or learning how to spell based on how you type the letters, how you type the word. So, but the great thing about Mercury and Earth is that as learners, Mercury and Earth people tend to be hard workers, and they don't let themselves be stopped by disinterest in a subject, which is really what sets them apart from the fire and water Mercury people, because those folks really need to have a feeling for the subject in order to learn it. So Mercury and Earth people can plod if necessary, but ultimately work their way through any knowledge that they want to gain. And that can be a real benefit when you get to university and you find that, maybe learning isn't as easy as it used to be, and you're going to have to work at it. Work environments really, really matter to Mercury in Earth people. They have to be organized. And also when listening to a teacher, the ideas have to be organized. They have to be delivered in a structure that makes sense. It's partially bodily, it's partially intuitive, it's like kinesthetic. But the work environment has to involve physical objects that fit neatly into your hand, that you're comfortable using. So like your keyboard would really matter. Maybe you want it to be ergonomic, maybe that's not what matters, but something physical about your workspace is going to matter if you have Mercury in Earth. And you want to set up the workspace so that you can be comfortable in it and engage your mind, but also engage your body. That might mean being able to move around a little bit. It certainly means being ergonomically comfortable, because part of what's going to be on your mind is the health of your body long term, so that you can work sustainably. So let's talk about voice when it comes to Mercury and Earth. The voice is always going to be, maybe a little bit more slow, maybe a little bit more plodding, but certainly deliberate and thorough and delivering a message which is well organized and thoroughly thought out. Let's talk about fire, Mercury in fire. Now, the thing about fire is that Mercury in fire needs inspiration. And they do tend to communicate in an inspired way, which can lead to hyperbole, which is kind of anti-Mercury. And that I think is a chief problem with Mercury in Sagittarius, which is the sign that Mercury is in detriment in. And that's because it's the opposite sign of Gemini. So Mercury is kind of uncomfortable in Sagittarius and is prone to, sort of blathering on and not getting to the point and, making up stories and fables and generating a lot of excitement, but not really necessarily leading to facts. And so there's some struggles there. There's some struggles there, definitely. But Mercury in Sagittarius, as with all Mercury in the fire signs, loves to learn from a truly inspired teacher. And that's really what's needed. If the subject bores you, find a teacher, and you have to study it, find a teacher who loves the subject, and you can pick up their inspiration. You can get excited and enthusiastic about the subject because you'll pick up on their excitement. If you can find a teacher who's a real performer, who just puts on a show every time they teach, you're going to learn a lot from that teacher. So yeah, the excitement, the enthusiasm, the inspiration of fire really need a place in your thought process, your communication process, and your learning process when you have Mercury in one of the fire signs. You may have to learn to curb your tongue. You may find that you're a little bit too blunt or conversely too sharp, which actually means the same thing, telling the truth in awkward moments. That's a problem sometimes with Mercury and fire. When it comes to the work environment, what's needed is to be able to get up and move around periodically, to be able to maybe pace while you're thinking, pace while you're developing ideas. That would again be, Mercury in Sagittarius or Mercury in Aries as well, and to not feel like you're trapped. So and again, you need to be excited about your work and your work flows. So you cannot afford to have them be too constrictive. They have to feel like they liberate you. It has to feel like a liberation and an excitement to be able to do your work and to generate ideas in your work and express your voice in your work. And the more that you can set up your environment like that, maybe finding somebody else that you work with that you can bounce ideas off of, that you can generate that excitement and enthusiasm with. Because it's not just a want, it's really a need to help you to be efficient and to help your voice really come out. So, and now lastly, let's talk about Mercury in water. Now, Mercury is also in detriment in Pisces because that's the opposite sign to Virgo. And Pisces is a water sign. The other two are Scorpio and Cancer. Mercury really struggles in water in general. Water is quite different from the nature of air because water is emotional and intuitive and expressly non-rational, which is a way I describe water deliberately because from air's point of view, water is irrational. And I think that most modern societies really are biased towards the air point of view and biased against the water point of view. So Mercury in water struggles because the thought process, the communication process cannot separate itself from emotion. And that's actually a good thing if you know how to use it. Mercury in water can be powerfully intuitive and can learn like water, which is to say, Mercury in water children learn best in a small learning environment with a teacher that they can bond to emotionally. Now, obviously, if you're in preschool or grade school or kindergarten, you want to have a motherly teacher. If your child has Mercury in water, You want to hope that they can bond emotionally with the teacher so that they can learn. They want to have that motherly feel. They want to be nurtured, and they want to be noticed, even though theirs is not necessarily the shiniest mind. But I'll tell you this, it is probably the deepest mind. So, but as you age and you move into high school and you move into college, you can actually learn from a teacher that you have a crush on, but you can't let that put you in a bad situation. And that's the problem there. You can have a crush on your teacher, you can learn from your teacher, but don't sleep with your teacher. And I mean, who can tell young people this? You can't tell young people this until they like make that error and just blow it, right? But what I'm saying is that Mercury in water can learn from somebody that they have an emotional connection with. And that is something that you can utilize to learn. Another thing that I've figured out about Mercury in water, I think it applies really strongly to Mercury in Pisces, is that because Mercury processes thoughts and ideas in a non-linear way, I think Mercury and water people will discover that some subjects are just like you could just absorb them by osmosis just by being in the environment of that. Place yourself in a laboratory and you'll learn chemistry, right? But I do think there has to be some interest in it. And there will always be some subjects for which you can place yourself in the environment, you can find a teacher that you like, but that subject will just never penetrate your consciousness. And that's okay. It's not for you. Go find the thing that is. And that thing you'll find you can learn amazingly well. You will occasionally find Mercury and water people in the maths, but what you'll find is that in their learning process, they were very happy to quickly move beyond the point where they had to prove their process. Because sometimes a Mercury and water person will go A, B, C, D, Z, and they'll leap to the answer and they won't be able to tell you how they got there. It was just a lightning flash of intuition and they can't explain it, but it works. So Mercury and water, it's kind of ineffable. Mercury in water's voice can get inside of another person. It can be so powerful, so hypnotic. It can just feel like they're speaking inside of you when you're talking to a Mercury and water person. It can be deeply sympathetic, hypnotic, compassionate, empathetic. Yeah. And psychic too. Lots of, psychic ideas, otherworldly ideas. Again, no idea where they came from. And the best way to have them arrive in your mind is to stop trying. Again, water, right? Water doesn't work by doing. You can never push the river. It works by allowing. So Mercury and water, well, what do you need to do? You need to allow ideas to come. You need to allow ideas to process. You need to allow the learning to soak into your head. You need to allow your voice to speak your message into the world. All right. During the course of this workshop, we are going to look at what it means if you have Mercury retrograde in your chart and how that impacts things like, your learning, your communicating, your work environment, and so on. Also, which phase of the 4-month Mercury cycle you were born in, because the retrograde phase is only one part. And whatever phase you were born in, that might tell us something about your intelligence and your processing speed. And also how to communicate with somebody whose Mercury and Mercury style is very different from your own. And also why it is that productivity, as you can find books on productivity, how to organize your desk or your office or your mind or your lists to get stuff done. And productivity systems are great. I've tried several of them, some of the great ones out there. But they don't work for everybody, even though they do present themselves as like a cookie cutter solution. They don't necessarily work for everybody. And in this workshop, I want to explore what works for you and why those systems didn't necessarily work for you, but what might work better. And also I want to talk about how to write on a schedule with your Mercury sign. So